Hello everyone, welcome back to Olive Boy Pens. I'm coming back at you dressed a little bit fancier than normal because I've got a comparison for you today that is also a little bit fancier than normal. Today we are going to be looking at not one, not two, but three Montblanc fountain pens spanning about 70 years? I'm really excited to show you guys these. So, check out my little fancy shirt pocket today. It's not often I get to look down and see that, but first off, we've got my Montblanc 142 masterpiece from the 1950s. Then, got dear friend of the channel, Mike's also 1950s 144G, which is the slightly larger size. And finally, also Mike's modern Montblanc 145 Le Petit Prince, which is a lovely little pen. These are very cool pens, and I really like to look at vintage versus modern in terms of Montblanc because they are a brand that has really kind of changed their strategy and approach over the years while sticking to kind of a pretty similar catalog of pens, with, of course, some exceptions, which I will be talking about. The Montblanc Meisterstück, or masterpiece in English, line has existed looking like this and attracting attention looking like this since the 1950s. These are one of the most iconic pens ever made. They are a very recognizable logo. They have done an incredible job in branding and marketing in terms of making themselves kind of the fountain pen or the luxury pen. Like, most non-pen people would still maybe recognize a Montblanc, even if they aren't necessarily the best pens. And we'll get into that, whether or not they are. And what's interesting in that, much like many other modern brands that have kind of more or less rested on their laurels, I'm going to be looking at whether or not the reputation that they have garnered from their older pens has actually stayed in line with, you know, how much hype they get. Like, does Montblanc still deserve the attention it gets and the kind of cachet that they have from their historical line of pens? And I think there's a lot of answers to that, but I'll be throwing my proverbial hat into the ring when we look at these three fabulous Montblanc fountain pens. So, let's get right into it. Ooh, feeling like a fancy boy today in today's installment of Vintage versus Modern. Well, I think I'm going to start with both the 142 and the 144 because, in many ways, they are almost exactly the same. There are some very slight differences, though, so I guess between these two I'll start with the 142. The 142 is a fairly small pen. Capped, it is 128 millimeters from top to top. And uncapped, which you will notice is a screw to open, it is 110 millimeters long. It's got about a number 5 sized nib by modern standards, which is, I feel like, appropriately sized for this for this pen. The ink window, I think you can see, ink window is decently transparent, and you can see that there's some ink in there. And one very special thing about this pen is that it has a telescopic piston system, which means it's kind of hard to describe. I will put a picture up here of what it looks like on the inside, but it basically means that the piston rod kind of collapses upon itself, and instead of taking up like this much space in the barrel, takes up about half as much. It's a very complicated system that Montblanc has since abandoned in favor of a more simple, threaded rod type of piston. But it is crazy because this pen holds much more ink than you would think. And I really like it for that reason. It is a very small pen that you can use for a very long time. Another interesting to note about this specific pen is, Montblanc's kind of design has stayed very similar over the years, but, in this line of the 1-4, whatever line, where you got, a little trim band here, you got 2 thin bands and 1 thick band, and then your classic Meisterstück clip, as well as the snow cap, though this is a celluloid snow cap, and you can kind of tell because it's a little bit ivory colored instead of like a pure snow white. One thing to note specifically about this one is that the cap band does not say Meisterstück on it. It says Masterpiece. And that's worth noting because that means that this is an export model. So that was meant to export to an English-speaking country. You can also see that as a result of it saying made in Germany in perhaps the smallest letters imaginable. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to capture that, but either way. It also has 142 stamped on the back of the barrel, as well as R, which I don't know what that means, and then M and a little arrow. Probably has something to do with the nib size, which again, yes, is a medium. The body is made out of celluloid, and part of how you can tell that this is a vintage pen is it's got one of these little holes in the cap. And that is something you'll see on almost every vintage pen. I guess it's like a vent hole. It doesn't expose the nib to air, but it exposes the section so that when you, I guess, if you were to uncap it very quickly, it wouldn't pull ink out of the pen. If anyone has any insight exactly on why those are on there, please let me know in the comments. I could look it up, and I think I have. I just have a terrible memory. The 144, as I said earlier, or I guess the 144G, is a very, very similar pen. It's, black celluloid, ivory snow cap, same trim, though this one is worth noting that the trim rings are different colors. The thin ones are silver and the middle one is gold tone, but it is brassed a little bit as well as the clip. This pen is not in as good condition as the 142 is, but it is still a lovely pen. It is marked 144G on the blind cap of the telescopic piston system, and EF, because this is in an extra fine nib. Pretty hard to see these, but, So this one is in kind of rough shape in that the cap has shrunken around the barrel. So there are 2 cracks in the cap lip, and it also makes it kind of a doozy to take off. It runs into the threads a little bit. So you'll note, so I'm unscrewing, and then it kind of gets stuck here for a little bit, so I'll have to gently pry that off, revealing a stunning 2-tone Montblanc nib. This one is an extra fine, flexible nib, and it is a good bit larger than the nib on the 142. Although these pens are within 1 millimeter of each other in length, the 144 is about 2 grams heavier, just because it's slightly thicker in every dimension, and then of course the bigger nib, and that means a bigger piston mechanism. Again, these are almost indistinguishable pens if you were to maybe have them separately. It's just that the 142 is a little bit smaller. So yeah, that is what you're looking at in terms of, your most classic vintage Montblanc pen. Timeless. The design has remained largely unchanged besides, material quality and all that over the years. And we will see what Montblanc has been doing kind of in terms of design innovation with the 145. So the 145 is a model that does exist in vintage Montblancs, but is kind of different. So a vintage 145 would actually be even bigger than this pen in terms of like girth and nib size and all that. But, even though this is a longer pen, underneath the cap, the nib is actually about the same size as the 142. So it's kind of undersized. It's about the same size there. So that's interesting to note. I'm not sure how I feel about the proportions of that. This pen is metal and kind of brown burgundy precious resin, as Montblanc calls it. It's a plastic pen. Nothing wrong with the plastic pen. They just, it's kind of funny that they call it precious resin. The trims are, I believe, rhodium plated. You've got Montblanc Meisterstück, which is masterpiece in German, on the cap band, kind of laser engraved in there. Got a metal, not a piston turning knob. This is a cartridge converter pen. And then you've got some additional kind of branding story elements on this pen because it is the Le Petit Prince edition of the 145. It's got the little star, and then it's got some lines from the book. Toutes les grandes personnes ont d'abord été des enfants. All of the big people have before been kids. And, that's a really cute thing. Underneath the cap, the slightly undersized nib does win some points for me because it's got the cutest little drawing of a sheep, of course, from the book, as well as 4810 on it. The feed is plastic, unlike the ebonite feeds on the vintage Montblancs, but that's pretty much par for the course. The filling system is, of course, a cartridge converter. It says use Montblanc ink only, which, I won't tell anyone if you use a non-Montblanc ink. This, honestly, I like it more than I thought I would. It doesn't win any points for me in terms of construction, but the overall design is just restrained enough. Montblanc has some pretty gaudy, overdone branded editions, like the new Sir Arthur Conan Doyle edition comes to mind in terms of just like blasting references to a book onto a pen. But there are a couple every once in a while that are really just like classy takes on a beloved story. Let's get to some writing. First off, we're going to do the 142. This has got a medium stiff two-tone gold nib. The ink I'm using today is Montblanc Elvis. I forget exactly the name. And yeah, this is a really solid writing nib. It's a pretty, solid round medium. It's got nice ink flow. Very user-friendly nib, which, makes sense. I think I would, if I wasn't worried about having cap lip cracks, I would post this. But I'm worried about it, busting the cap open. This is a nice pen. I don't want to break it. So even though it's a little small in the hand, I use it unposted just out of an abundance of caution. Nice ink flow. Not particularly scratchy or feedbacky or just nice and smooth. Just no complaints here at all. Very well balanced pen. Feels very, very high quality. It definitely sells that Montblanc experience. I feel like I'm gonna write something important with it, even though that is invariably false, as I have never written anything important in my whole life. That's a true fact. So, let's look at what will invariably be the writing winner of the day, the extra fine flex nib on this gorgeous 144G from the 50s. Montblanc 144G EF Flex. So, oh wow, is that dry? It's like I jinxed myself. I said it was going to be the writing winner, and then it ran dry as I was writing with it. So now it's back full. I guess I've been writing with this pen more than I thought. It is a rather dry pen unflexed, which makes sense being that it's an extra fine. It's almost like a slightly more usable version of the hard setting on the Vintage Justice I reviewed a couple of weeks ago. It is a nice nib, unflexed. It is very nice. It is very fine. But the real win is when you get to push it out a little bit. Just effortlessly. You know, it's not a crazy wet noodle situation, but excellent spring back, really nice flow. Just it's as good as a vintage flex nib gets, but on a very high quality celluloid piston filled pen. This is the type of experience that Montblanc built their decades-old reputation on. Just solid, dependable, excellent pen. And of course, the nib drawing, a little easier to do with this nib than with the other one, just because you can be a little bit more precise with the lines. 4010M. Lovely. Quite lovely, innit? Well, that does it for the vintage Montblanc. Let's see how the modern one stacks up. Not going to have a Montblanc blue in this one because it just has the ink that it came with. It was, I believe it's the Montblanc Purdy & Sons single malt whiskey, which supposedly smells like whiskey. I can't smell it. Anyway. Montblanc. 145. PP for Petit Prince. And it's a medium nib. So, this nib is fine. I guess not literally, it's medium, but it's just like somewhat smooth. There is kind of some like sharpness to it at certain angles, but nothing offensive. It flows nicely. It's got a little bit of stubbishness to it. I could see myself using this nib. I think that the 142 is better as a medium nib. And, you know, there's no real softness of any kind to write home about. It is a small, stiff gold nib. But there's nothing specifically wrong with it, and I think for the average Montblanc user, this is great. This is, you know, it's fine. So, while this is the worst, I guess the worst writer out of all of them today, I don't hate it. It's just kind of a tough competition. There's a little star on it. Cute. It's okay. It's just not very inspiring, you know. These, like this one, feels really good, feels like a good vintage nib. This is a lovely vintage flex nib. And this is not either of those things. So it's kind of hard to stack it up against it. I wish it was the same size as the 144, just a slightly bigger, like 5.5 instead of a 5. But let's get on over to my final thoughts on these 3 beautiful vintage Montblanc. So, what is my take on these 3 both very similar and very different Montblanc pens? Though 2 are more similar than different. Well, first things first, I think I'm very happy to have my 142 over all of these. I think it's, you know, condition aside, it's a very nicely sized pen. The nib performs very well. I'm just overall, it's a very dependable Montblanc. It's very classy. It's, you know, it's in great shape. The filling system and nib were serviced by Stacy Hills very recently, and he did an excellent job. It's just a fabulous little pen, and kind of a rarity, being that it's made for export instead of a, you know, domestic product. The 144G is, I think, like a dream pen for me also, just, you know, not taking into account the particular condition of this pen, you know, with the you know, shrinkage, etc. But it is a very nice size. It's a very nice weight as well. It's got it feels very high quality, you know, even taking into account the fact that the celluloid has shrunk. I love these silver and gold rings. I think that's a really nice touch, and it is something that is very sought after in vintage Montblanc collection, the kind of two-tone rings. The nib is unlike anything you could get on the market today. It is springy, it's got nice feedback. It is also, I mean, it looks very much like a modern Montblanc Meisterstück nib, but the writing performance is unmatched, even by my 142. These pens, both with their telescopic piston system, I think will beat even the piston filling Modern Montblancs, just because they hold so much more ink and so much less space. The whole pen feels super, super high quality, super precise. There's definitely a reason why there's a cult following behind this particular filling system, because it is A++. It is so great. All that being said, I actually really like the Modern 145. I think it's also because the Petit Prince story has, you know, had a big influence on my childhood, and it has a lot of charm to me. But this particular pen, I think, is the right amount of what Montblanc does today. I think some of their higher end pens are so overblasted with references to whatever source material they're referencing. But this one just has a couple of little sparse details that are very classy. I love the little star on here. It's just so cute. The little lines from the book, I could honestly do without. Although the nib is a little bit small, I think it's very undersized for this pen. The little sheep on it is so cute. I don't necessarily love this as a cartridge converter pen, but you know, it gets the job done. It's probably what's best for the modern consumer, and it feels, you know, pretty solid, even though it weighs the same as the 144G, but is a bigger pen. Makes sense because this has the brass piston and this is just a cartridge converter with some metal bits on it. But I was expecting this to be a total dunk on the 144G. I do still like the nib least out of all of them, and for the price, I'd much rather have, you know, if you can find them, both of these for the price of the Modern Petit Prince. But if you don't want to go vintage hunting, you don't want to deal with a pen that's potentially not in the best of condition, I think a pen like this one could be something you would enjoy. I wish they would do just more better, exciting nibs on their lower end pens. Because, you know, you can get a flex nib on a Montblanc. You're just going to spend like $2,000 on it for the Meisterstück 149 calligraphy. Or, you know, some crazy bespoke music nib. Montblanc does it, they just won't do it for cheap. Whereas you can find nice, flexible Montblanc nibs on a, not cheap, but more reasonably priced vintage Montblanc. You just can't get stuff that references your favorite childhood book. So you're really getting a totally different value proposition with a similar logo. I do like this pen. I don't think I would ever buy one. I could see myself buying a 142. This one was actually a graduation gift from Mike. Again, thank you. But I could see myself spending, you know, $300 on it. It really is the Montblanc experience, I guess. And you have the, you know, I think the vintage Montblancs are a little bit more charming just because they're celluloid, and it is, you know, not something you can really quantify, but they just feel different. And the telescopic piston, I think, has a lot more value to me than a cartridge converter. It just feels more special. So I could see myself buying this. You know, maybe in a couple years, once I make some more money, I could see myself buying a Flex 144G like this. I would love to. Being a vintage Montblanc, you can also get this in different, much rarer, much more expensive celluloid finishes. You can get a beautiful, almost like Arco-y platinum finish. I'll put some pictures, like striped models. They're like the most beautiful pens in the world, in my opinion. But, you know, you got to spend thousands of dollars to get it, which is modern Montblanc money. So at that point, it's up to you. Either way, does Montblanc live up to the hype? Sometimes. I don't think that this is worth $730. But very few pens are worth what they are, like what you charge for them at MSRP. I'm sure you could find one of these used for maybe around the $500 mark. And that's true of very many modern Montblancs, is that their MSRP is cut almost in half sometimes by their resale value. So it's worth buying a vintage Montblanc. I would say almost, you know, 10 times out of 10, they're pretty good value once you get them at a cheaper price. So yeah, that's my take on these three beautiful little snow-capped pens. I hope you enjoyed this fancy review. It was a real privilege to get a chance to look at all of these and send them respectfully back. So thank you again for that, Mike. And yeah, if you enjoyed this one, please consider subscribing. It definitely, you know, keeps me going. I'm looking forward to getting to 1,000 soon. Then I can start doing this even more often. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you next time.